small amount of time to gather their attention, and we want the eye to go to the right place. So this is a sample that just demonstrates that. You can have a dramatic background without it being distracting. The emphasis here is on a single piece, and most categories will go that way, with just one item per shot. Occasionally there are some exceptions. You might have a jewelry suite, so that a necklace with matching earrings is sometimes appropriate for that venue. But groupings are kind of rare, just certain categories. Glasswork, for example, sometimes metalwork. So if we go to the next slide, glasswork is sometimes done in a like a family of work. So you're showing the ability to produce something with a common design language. So showing a grouping there for a jury shot would be more acceptable. But these again are very much serious studio equipment and a fairly involved process. We can take that process and go more toward an editorial approach. So let's go to the next one. Again, a grouping, but this time we've introduced, there we go, props, okay, and lots of samples of the work. So this was intended to have kind of a festive, holiday sort of feel to it. It was produced specifically to be a banner for somebody's booth at shows, but it would also serve quite nicely as a banner for a Facebook page or something like that. This again was studio work. It was an extremely complicated shot. Glass, of course, adds that extra dimension of difficulty. And this was actually a composite of, I think, 2 or 3 shots in order to get the look of each piece of glass correct. Not the kind of thing I'm going to advise for a do-it-yourself kind of thing. So let's go to the next one here. To remember. Okay, again, thinking of props, sometimes they're very, very simple. You can see in this one. It's a pocket watch. It just happened to be a shot that I did for selling that watch on eBay. But by adding a background, it made sense. Pocket watch, pocket, and a coat. They kind of go together. There's a coherence there that makes sense and just helps to build a little bit of a mood or story. And that's really what we're looking for with an editorial shot. We're looking to give it an environment where it makes sense, or to tell a story, or to establish this aspirational aspect of the item that you feel like you're reaching up to something and you desire it, which of course has to help sales. So let's call up another one. You'll see that leather jacket got quite a bit of use. Just have to select these and, oh yeah, same one. But again, an eBay shot, definitely overkill for selling in that venue, but it made the item look very desirable. The rest of the shots were really plain Jane. But pieces that go together, it looks almost like you're getting ready for an Audi or something like that here. The film was contemporary to the camera, so are the pens. One of the things about this one that I want to point out is the mixed light. I don't know if you could tell that there's 2 different color temperatures at work here. Imagine a scene where this is laying on a bureau or bed or something near a window. So the window light's coming in from behind the scene. That's what's illuminating the top of that camera. The warmer tungsten light is coming from over the camera right position. So like an interior overhead light or desk lamp or something like that. Mixing color temperatures is tricky stuff. In this case, it made sense, and it didn't make final color balance difficult to do. It can make it a nightmare. I've done portraits where we had daylight, tungsten, and fluorescent all mixing in the same scene, and the guy doing the printing was just about ready to shoot. It didn't work out terribly well. So let's go to the next one, and we'll feature a guitar. This is an independent maker, who's a friend of mine.
We're good.
Here we go. All right, good. And there's a couple of things to point out here. This was a relatively simple setup. Not completely. I did use studio lighting, but there's a couple of things that could be replicated here if you needed to. For one, it's very uncluttered. Even though it was in my dining room, which is typically known for clutter, the guitar amplifier really is just a prop, something to lean the guitar against, something to give context, right? It's part of the story. So I didn't want to draw attention to it. The logos on that were photoshopped out, so it's kind of generic. Emphasis is, of course, on the guitar itself. The backdrop, that's just a pleated shade. It's a screen door size, less sliding door size, runner right down to the floor, and a light and a reflector at a very shallow angle grazing across that to give it the texture. Probably the most frequently used tool in my arsenal shows up it doesn't show up in the shop, and you see its effect. White foam core. I hardly ever do a shot where I haven't at least used the small piece of it. This was a full sheet, and it was placed off the camera left, and it does two things. It was angled so that the light falling on it gave a nice gradient look across the face of that guitar. That black guitar would have just about been a black hole without some kind of light falling on it. The other thing it did is it lit up that chrome. You can see how all of that chrome is bright. If you're working with shiny polished metal or glass, it's going to be a mirror, and you need to know what's being reflected. Yeah, I've seen people get into trouble with that. Wear clothes when you shoot. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Again, another studio type shot, and this is a recent one that I did with Robin. We did a series of her pieces, and she specifically wanted shots for using on social media instead of in front of a jury. And that gives us a lot of freedom to do things that we wouldn't do otherwise. In this case, multiple pieces of her work that were all related, and props. In this case, the holly. It was a relatively complicated setup. There was a bar out of the screen above the frame, hanging the pendants, and then a couple of other vices holding sprigs of holly, both before and behind the subject. And that distance had to be exaggerated because I wanted them to be out of focus, or mostly out of focus. Enough so that it'd still be recognizable, but if they were compacted too close to the subject, they would be sharp, and then your eye would not know where to go. We really tend to gravitate toward bright objects and sharp objects. And in this case, we have both, and that works to our advantage. We've got another example problem that's coming up next. A little bit simpler. The background is the same as the other shot. It's just a sheet of black glass with the light off in the distance that gave me that gradient. And what was that? Queen Anne's lace in the foreground. It provides just a little bit of framing for the piece. It also had the really neat little benefit of hiding the wax blob that's allowing that ring to stand up. So there's a dirty little trick that hide the wax. That way you don't have to.
It's easier than photoshopping.
Don't have to Photoshop it out because that is tricky. And then the next shot is another one from that series. This time with 5 different pendants and the background. This case, the transition in the background was just a little indistinct, and I wanted anyway a little more definition. So I added that little white line to give a horizon. I don't think it detracts really. It just kind of helps define the overall environment. So we will leave the studio and go outside, put the lights away, and just shoot with a normal camera here on the next one. So we've got a ceramic vessel by Stephen Merritt. He works out of Irondequoit. And this is on my front porch. I just took it out and set it on the edge of the table. And really, there's two key things here. Well, maybe three. One, we're on a covered porch, so I'm dealing with indirect light, and it's not harsh. It's got that nice diffuse character that gives some shape to the piece without making it too bland. We have the background or that railing from the porch is probably a good 6 feet away, which allows it to go out of focus. And again, we want sharpness at our subject and not everywhere front to back in the frame. And then the third thing is paying attention to the background. I will admit that little blue glow right behind the top of the vessel was a complete accident. But the fact that it's lighter than the object was not. I did not want it placed against a tree trunk where it would vanish and then you would not see the form. So what makes this shot work is, in this case, a digital SLR with a relatively long lens. It was 135 millimeters, and it was shot almost wide open, maybe f2.8, f4, something like that. For those of you that work with cameras on manual, you'll know what that means. It means that the opening in the lens is large, and it gives us that shallow depth of focus. Next one. And here's proof that Yvonne has no concerns with me being a competitor. It's a state class that I made last year as a gift, and again, it's just a really straightforward shot with it leaning up against a window in my house. The large aperture again, because it's a planar object, I don't need a lot of depth of focus. In fact, I don't want it, because the house next door, were it in focus, just would not look so good behind the glass. But with it out of focus, it just kind of gives some context that we're in a window, and it lets that light come through and show off the colors. Thank you. I was not efficient in a while. Okay, next one. Okay, you'll pick about on a theme here. I shoot a lot of guitars. I've been going through a few projects lately and building and repairing and doing things like that, but I also shoot for some customers who build. So again, this is just a casual shot. It really only took a few minutes. Again, my front porch, loving the light out there. And I kind of broke my own rule a little bit about props and distractions, but the Telecaster, style of guitar this is a really classic American design. So having the flag flip in a little bit from the corner was deliberate, and I let that carry through. But it's out of focus enough. Again, we know where our attention is supposed to be here. Okay, and then we'll go to the next one too. And not quite the last guitar shot. But again, the advantages of a relatively long lens, I think this was 85 millimeters. And again, shot nearly wide open so that you can throw that background out of focus. It's an urban neighborhood. If that was sharp front to back, you'd see cars parked on the street. The house 2 doors down with paint peeling and things like that. When it's out of focus, it actually looks pretty nice. I learned that one from wedding shots that we had done on the porch. The overgrowth that really didn't look that good in person. When it was out of focus, it looked lush. It's gorgeous. So use that trick if you can, if you're using a real camera. Now, the next shot is essentially the same shot, slight change in position, but this time shot with a phone camera. It's iPhone 10R, I think, and it's notice the difference is that the background now is much more in focus. I've tried to keep it so that it's relatively simple. It's not incongruous with the whole thing. I probably should have used the foam core on this one. You see that the face of the guitar is kind of dark. This was done really quickly when I found out I was going to be doing this. Okay, but this is going to be contrasted against the next shot. Now, don't flip it quite yet, but I just want to show, okay, with a little thought and positioning and thinking about the light and the location, you get a pretty good shot with the camera in your phone. Unlike this next one. And I'm going to have to apologize to a friend of mine for stealing this, but this is the guy who builds the guitars and does wonderful work, except with the camera.
He probably won't see this.
Okay, don't do this. This is not how you want to sell your objects, your work. There's so much in this frame that says nothing about his work as a luthier. Prop the guitar up on a chair, fire screen, all the little doodads and the tchotchkes up on the shelf really don't contribute to this. And really the biggest thing is that the object is small in the frame. You'll probably hear me say it multiple times between here and the end. Fill the frame with your subject, the thing you want to drive attention to. There's just so much here that doesn't contribute to selling the guitar. The other problem is we're inside with a harsh overhead light, a couple of other stray lights coming in from other directions. It's not helping at all in the color balances of this. So a little forethought goes a long ways. Now, to his credit, he's worked at improving and cleaning up some of the clutter, so let's go to the next shot. Okay, most of the clutter's gone, but okay, it's not a pretty wall. It's not finished. We're missing baseboards. There's a tag on the floor. The amp is kind of dominant in the frame, and again, the guitar, what does that occupy? Maybe a fifth of the frame. It really should be bigger, so that we know what we're looking for. Yes, drop that silly amp right out of the bottom. Maybe even angle the guitar so that it could be even bigger in the frame. And some better light. Again, that single point light is harsh shadow, and it's really not informing us much about the shaping of the body of that object. So we'll go to the next one. Some more phone images, and this time I just went around the house looking for artwork that we have that I could put together, some quick iPhone shots that might work well on social media. Again, it's a grouping of multiples. There's a sense of composition happening. That shouldn't really be a problem for most folks here, right? You're artists, you understand the rules of composition, you know when to break them, and give some thought to it. Now, one thing in particular to point out here, they're sitting on a laminated maple table. Notice how the stripes in that table are straight. Okay, that comes from having the camera parallel to the table. It's, well, almost parallel anyway. Well, I won't go into that, but anyway, they're even, right? And that's something that, because you can review the image quickly, you can look at that, you can actually see it in the back of the camera, and if you adjust things just so, then that is a distraction, even in a more complicated shot like this compared to the jury shots. So, we'll do one more with the Richard Ernie bowls here, and all I did was move them from the table to the floor. And notice by throwing the grout lines on a diagonal, now I'm not worried about alignment nearly as much. We can get away with a little more tilt. If I wanted to, I could maybe go down for a lower angle that would show the depth of the pieces, or relative lack of it. The one in front is fairly shallow. The one above it to the left is quite a bit deeper and has some really cool modeling along the edge. So another angle, and that's important to do. Don't just take one shot and call it done. Move around it, try different sides, look for that angle that works, look for the grouping that works, and then throw away the ones that don't. Okay, and another piece of glass. I do not often use direct sunlight. You'll often see shots where, I need to have good light, right? They said I need lots of light. So you go out on a sunny day, and it's harsh. And for a lot of things, that doesn't work. For glass, it works. Unfortunately, there's a couple of problems with the shot, and I will tell you what they are. For one, the phone camera has a relatively wide angle lens on it. So it's distorting the shape of that piece. The pouring spout on this picture looks a lot longer than it really is in real life. Now, if I was just representing that, I had glass pieces like that, okay, maybe not a problem. It looks, it adds a sense of dynamic energy to it. But it's not really representational of the piece. The other problem with it is clutter. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, there's some junk sitting there that should have been moved. I photoshopped out the worst of it, but really, just a shove would have taken care of it. So, to get rid of this distortion, okay, let's go to the next one. I backed up. Okay, that's changing the angle of view, and you see that the spout is not stretched as much as it was in the previous shot, and it's more accurate to what it does. Now, I had the problem with this is it looked like a great shot of the guitar in that it was really small in the frame, so I had to go in and crop this one. Okay, we might not be able to get away with that if we were doing a jury show because you're losing information and size. But for social media, when you only need an image that's 800 or 1,000 pixels big at most, you've got lots of cropping room in the camera, so it's okay to back up some and take advantage of that. It's probably a good point to mention focus. Don't use blurry shots. They're not doing you any favors. And on the phone, most people probably know this. I had to have a teenager show me. If you click on the screen at your subject, it calls up the focus box. It tells it, hey, I'm interested in that part. And then there's a little bar on the side where you can raise or lower the exposure. Okay, so in this case, I brought the exposure up because all that backlight coming in the window was causing it to the picture was too dark. So I had to elevate that exposure a bit so the colors came out. And we can go to one more here. Jewelry, I think, is probably going to be the toughest thing to do with a phone camera. Because of its size. You'll notice I did not use a ring here. Trying to shoot a ring with a camera phone is going to be really hard. This is a bangle bracelet, and I've tried to shoot it before. It's not cooperative. It won't stand up. In fact, when it lays down, it just looks bad. It doesn't lie there gracefully. So it needed a prop. Again, it seemed like kind of a festive item, something you might wear to a party. So, okay, let's grab a wine bottle. And then stood it up well enough to be able to get a shot of the face of it. And that one, by the way, had to be cropped pretty extensively. Again, it's a small object. I could only get so close without causing a lot of distortion, so I did trim away quite a bit of the image doing this. This was just on the kitchen table. Yeah, I turned off the room lights and just let the ambient light come in from outside, and that was enough to light it up. So if I was going to round up here and just summarize, have some fun with it. Tell a story, give it an environment that makes sense for that object or for the market that you're aiming for. Fill the frame so that we know what we're looking at and why we're looking at it. Watch the focus. With blur, there's really a couple of things that can happen. Like I mentioned, telling it where to focus, because sometimes they miss, right? They say, no, that's important over there. No, for really. So you can tell it. The other problem with blur could be motion. And hopefully we're mostly dealing with inanimate things, so they're not moving. But the camera could be moving. If you're in a low light, it has to leave the exposure much longer. And that's going to cause two problems. So risk of motion. It's also going to increase the noise, the granularity of that shot. So lots of light to work with in that image. Eliminate unnecessary objects, the clutter. Don't do a shot like that first, phone cam guitar shot. with the fireplace and all the tchotchkes. No. If it's in the frame, it needs to be at least important to establishing the environment or telling the story about your work. And that's about it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to pursue those.
Actually, I would love for you to just talk a little bit about, like, if you could break it down into the most essential. This is how you take a picture to show your product. Like, just the very basic for somebody who maybe doesn't really know anything and they're working with a phone. Like, what's the essential?
Okay.
We know focus.
Let's start with the very basics. Find a way to position the object where it looks good.
Yep.
And that might be how you prop it up against something, or the blob of wax, or whatever it is. Or sometimes it's a stack of things. And it could be a prop, like the wine bottle, that bracelet. Some kind of positioning where the object shows its best side. That might mean trying a number of angles. Think low. Go back to that shot of the Steve Marriott vessel, the ceramic vessel on my table. The camera was resting right on the table, so it's a real low angle of view. That would look entirely different if I had come in from a high angle and shot down on it.
So maybe try.
So try different elevations.
Because the phone shots are free. Like, you're not paying for those, right? So do them all.
Yeah. I remember seeing a commercial, something about, I can't remember what it was for, the commercial, right? But it was these guys doing product shots, for whatever their thing was. It might have been a website or something ad. And they were showing, using an iPhone to take their pictures. It was dozens and dozens and dozens of different slight variations of that, and then these are, that's the one. Usually for me, I go to the last one, right? You futzed around with it, and then, that's it, right? Then you're done.
Works backward.
Okay?
Yeah.
Don't take necessarily the personal, although sometimes that works. But really, positioning. And maybe it backs up a little bit from there, and thinking about the piece, how you want to represent it, who you're representing it to, what is that story that you need to convey in the shot. And that will lead you to things like background and props, and whether it's a grouping or a single item, things like that. After that, it's pay attention to what's in the viewfinder, take a shot, look at it critically. You really have to be as dispassionate as possible, which is, it's hard for us, right?
Yeah.
We take an ownership of it. Maybe even bring in somebody who's willing to be brutally honest. Because, that's what I'm going to have to do with my regular department.
Yeah.
There'll be an intervention.
He'll be glad after.
Yeah. And then it comes down to finding the light, and that might mean going to it or bringing the light to you. Right? I've taken desk lamps, clip-on reflectors from the hardware store. You can do all kinds of things. And it doesn't mean that the light has to be shining directly on your object. It can shine on that sheet of foam core, right? And what that does is it takes that little tiny light bulb, which is with harsh light, you bounce it off a wall or a screen or a piece of foam core, and now you've got this really large diffuse light source. Okay, and that can change, again, the character of the shadows. Some folks will use a light tint. There are plenty of options for that now that didn't exist before. You can find tabletop studio gear, Amazon, eBay, all over the place for relatively small dollars. There's a risk with those. You can light them too flat. They're so shadowless that things start looking bland. There are ways around that. Put one light really close to the tent, put the other one further away, or even just light it from one side, or sometimes stick a piece of black cardboard in there to give like a dark area to soak up some of the light so it doesn't get flat.
That's what I was going to ask. Is there such a thing as too much light for a photograph?
Yes. Yeah, there can be. I have found that when shooting outdoors, and this is kind of unrelated to products, but I'm sure I can tie it in somehow. But doing portraits outside, one of the things that's kind of fun to do is to deliberately underexpose the daylight so it looks more moody and not as washed out and bright as, say, midday sun can be. But then use a flash, either on the camera or off the camera, to provide the main light for your subject space. I did this for some portraits recently. And it's sometimes hard because you want that nice big wide open aperture to throw the background out of focus. But with that aperture, you've got all this daylight coming in, and you can only make your shutter speed so short because you need to have a certain minimum for the flash to work. So yes, you can have too much light, and I end up stacking filters on the front to knock that light down and be able to accomplish the effect. There are higher tech versions. There's a high speed sync, and it gets very techy very fast.
Yeah, which we're not going to be doing with the phone, but long story short, don't take your product out in blazing sunlight and shoot it with.
Yeah.
So you're talking about it.
But really, there it's not a question of the quantity of the light. It's a matter of the quality of it.
Uh-huh.
I could do an entire evening on lighting techniques. I did that actually for a camera club last year, and it gets into things like the size of the source and the distance of that source. The sun is enormous, right? It's a huge light source. It's so far away, it acts like a point source, right? We get, on a sunny day, we get very distinct shadows. Okay, if you're shooting an object or a person, you got dark, you got light, and that's it. There's nothing in between. There are things you can do to modify that. You might put a white screen or a scrim between the subject and the sun, like the white canopy on a picnic shelter, right? That will filter that light coming through, diffuse it a little bit. That's one way. I've got things that I can hold up to put between the light and the subject, or a reflector. You got these pop-up reflectors that have white on one side and silver or gold on the other, and you can use that to bounce light back into the shadow side of the subject. Again, to modify that light. And again, it's the quality of that light, not how much there is.
So I had typed in a question concerning lighting. Diane Bedford, she sells linoleum black prints, and she uses oil-based ink. Any suggestions to reduce glare?
Wow. To reduce, but not eliminate, right? Because if you're using oil-based inks, you don't want to lose that quality. There's going to be some shimmer there, right? And the ink is sitting on top of the paper. If we can convey that, all the better. My standby for reproducing two-dimensional artwork is a pair of lights on either side, skimming across almost at 90 degrees to the axis of the camera. And I find that's my best opportunity for reducing glare. Again, if you treat that subject, if you treat that subject as a mirror, okay, and from camera position, if you can, through any angle of that mirror, see the light source, that's glare. Okay, so if you move outside that family of angles, then you reduce the glare. And having that grazing angle, that can emphasize the texture. So, for instance, the paper itself has some texture. It can pick that up. It might have that little bit of glare on the edge of the ink that can give it that little bit of definition. Most of the time, I will have those lights at the same intensity. Not always. Because again, sometimes that can make it a little too flat.
So by not angling the light at the ink itself, you're not causing that like to bounce back.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. Get it away from the camera. It could be above, could be below. I like the sides because I have room to do it that way. Sometimes, fiber artists. I work with a fair number of quilters. right? And you can think of that as a two-dimensional piece, but no, there's texture there. So there's a shallow third dimension. And I have to be careful that the light isn't too even side to side because you start losing that quilted nature and the stitching. Sometimes, though, I do that and then add another light overhead that's falling down at a very shallow angle to the subject, pretty much at 90 degrees to the camera's view. Okay, what that does is that'll throw little shadows where there's texture. It'll also pick up a little extra glint and applied beads or things like that. So that works. There is a more complicated way of doing copy work with lights and polarizing film. It's cumbersome. It works great. If you're shooting behind something behind glass, it's pretty much the only answer. I have shot paintings that were done with a fair amount of gold leaf on them, and that gets into the whole thing all by itself because, again, that metal leaf, it's not an image forming mirror. It's still reflecting what it sees, and if I'm shooting perpendicular to the painting to keep it nice and square, then it's kind of reflecting me or whatever is behind me, and usually loses that character of metallic shimmer. What I've taken to do, and I've done quite a number of these for Robert Marks, painter in Rochester, and what we ended up doing was taking a piece of photo backdrop paper in gray, punching a hole through it so I could poke the lens through it, but the gray was too flat. Again, it took away that shimmer, and you didn't see the texture in that gold leaf that he had applied. So random strips of white and black tape placed, all over, looking like Eddie Van Halen's guitar, on this, and that did it. It gave enough detail, but indistinct detail, that it brought out the texture in that gold leaf. I wouldn't advise that for a printer.
That's quite sad.
From your business, photographing artwork, are there certain types of artwork that you're asked to photograph more than others? And are there other things that you photograph? What is your specialty?
Okay. Probably the most common is jewelry. Next after that would be ceramics and then fiber art. I don't do nearly as much glass as I would like to. And then metalwork, big, silversmithing pieces. I haven't had the opportunity to do many of those. I would love to because they're terribly difficult and a good challenge. Outside of the fine craft and art world, I also do some commercial product photography. I've got a customer that does kitchen gadgets. So once or twice a year, I'll go over to their office and set up on site and shoot their products for their catalogs. I've done shots in the bathroom for a company that does the installation of the fixtures. Yeah, that's tricky to set up lights in it. You don't find space like that.
Where there's mirrors and other lights.
Mirrors, shiny chrome, stainless steel, polished floors. Yeah, that's a challenge. Outside of the commercial aspects of shooting, one of my favorite things is the Jazz Festival. Didn't get to do that this year. For 10 years now, I've been shooting the Jazz Festival in Rochester, and I'm there every night, all night. I get there in the afternoon when they start, and I'm there until the late night jam session ends. Go home, upload the photos, sort through them. And if I'm not face down on the keyboard by then, I take a nap for an hour, get up, finish the processing because they want the photos uploaded by 9 in the morning. Go back to sleep, and do it all over again the next day.
Wow.
My wife prefers to get out of town. She says, I sleep all day, I'm up all night, I'm cranky. It's like having an infant again. So she can take a vacation, that works for us. But yeah, that's probably one of my favorite things to do, is shooting performers live in that environment. The stage lighting is always different. It's always a challenge. Trying to capture emotion. I invite you to check out my Flickr page, TJFUSS. That'll get there. I've got several years worth of examples of shots from the Jazz Fest and the other kinds of things that I shoot.
So you said that jewelry is one of the most challenging things, and we do have a lot of jewelry artists. So can you tell us maybe why it's so challenging and any pointers you might have for those of us who are trying to accomplish that?
Shiny metal, faceted stones with
Yes.
color.
Uh-huh.
That's the two things that make it tough. Because you're dealing with a sculptural object now, right? It's not like a flat mirror. It reflects from everywhere, right? And faceted stones, okay, not from everywhere, but like discrete angles chosen from everywhere, right? So positioning a light so you don't have that one facet that goes completely white means a lot of fussing around and adjusting, checking, and trying to do that. Faceted stones in particular pose a problem because they suck up so much of light. Especially when they're set in a shiny metal, which doesn't get quite as much light. So I'll often have to composite a shot. If I've got a combination of polished metal and faceted colored stone, I have to change the exposure and give a whole lot more exposure or a whole lot more light to that stone in order for it to light up and have the brilliance that we perceive in person. So that's a layering of shots. Trying to get it in one take is it's possible. It's different.
Brutal, isn't it?
But I find, but I find I really like trying to find arrangements for the pieces that show it to advantage. Necklaces in particular, they're not always floppy, right? But they're usually malleable, right? And you can do some interesting shapes. Like that first shot was from Magna. And just looking at the pieces that she had there, the components of it, and finding a shape for it on the table that complemented the components of her piece. That's really what I try to do. And I've got other examples where I had a necklace that was a lot of very complicated soldered chainmail style. Not just twist rings, but sheet solder every single joint. Right? Gorgeous work, and it was these concentric circles joined with a couple of rings, and then more concentric circles. So the whole arrangement was kind of arranged like those concentric circles, but you're there with tweezers, moving every link, getting they're not like this, but like centered. So getting that flow around, and you move one, and something moves over here. It's kind of like building a puzzle,
but worth it to spend the time.
Yeah, very much. I really like doing it, but have somebody come back to me and say, "I got it. I've been trying for years to get it in the show. I finally got it."
That's awesome.
I like hearing that. There was something else I was going to touch on, and I forget what it was. It's gone.
Tim, can you give us your contact information? What's the best way for people to reach you?
Let's see. Phone number is 585-208-7238. That's my cell line, so text or phone message is fine. My email address is tim, T-I-M, at pixel-wave.com, P-I-X-E-L dash or hyphen wave, W-A-V-E.com. And the website is pixel-wave.com. So I could.
And when we're done, we'll have your information below the video so they can find it under there.
I wanted to add to it. He's a lot of fun to work with. I went in, I was a little nervous. I didn't know what I should come up with really, and I gave him some basic information and what I wanted for instance, putting my work on Facebook. And he just came up with some wonderful ideas. I was very happy camper when I left. So thank you.
You are most welcome.
Leave some of it up to him, and he will really come up with some wonderful ideas.
I've found a variety of clients like to do things in different ways. I have some that are very active in the shoot, and they're certainly welcome to come in, be present throughout the shooting. I can show a captured image on a monitor so that we can review it and go, no, move that over there a little bit, you know, and do the zhuzhing necessary to really nail it. Others will drop off and sit and read a book. Others will drop off and dash and go do something more fun. And some will mail items to me, and I can work that way as well. Happy to do any of it. On occasion, I've gone on location for groups. We had a group out in Casanova that gathered enough people together so that we set up in a conference room in a library there and just spent the entire day shooting.
That's intense.
For the Keenan Craftsman
Yeah,
Show.
for 8 or 10 years, I think, I was on site at the Keenan 100 American Craftsman Show in the studio on their annex, and shooting for the vendors there. And it's fun because it's not the leisurely pace I took with your shots. I had the studio set up for 3 days doing your shots and thinking about it. Oh yeah, now I got this one, right? Or had run out across the neighborhood and get some Queen Anne's lace. Okay, I can do that. At the Keenan Center, it's chop chop. And
several different types of concerns, probably, right?
I had to be ready for anything.
Yeah.
I shot, little rings. I shot, life-size sculptures. One painting was, I think, 12 feet long.
Wow.
I used to bring an entire truckload of gear to that and just be ready to shoot anything. And it was a tremendous amount of fun. Unfortunately, after a while, just wasn't getting quite enough assignments there to make it worth, trekking out there for 3 days. Who knows? If things turn around, then maybe we'll go back to doing that because they really seem to appreciate having that service on site.
For sure. Are we good?
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for coming to
Thanks
see
again
us.
for having me.
Being here.
Right, sir.